Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's class on Color Theory Basics Part 2. I'm your instructor, Adrienne Hodge, and we will be using supplies purchased from Michael's this evening to complete this little color theory study that we started in Part 1. So it wasn't last week, it was the week before last. We had the week off for the holiday. So if you missed Part 1, you can find it on YouTube by searching the title of the class and Part 1. And so we'll be finishing up what we started then. But if you missed Part 1, still stick around because you can, just jump right in where we left off. We left at a good stopping point last week. So we're going to definitely be kind of carrying on in a little bit different direction from where we left off last week. So, and I'll review what we covered as well as soon as we get rolling. But I just wanted to mention that we have kind of a exciting change in these classes that I host for Michael's online going forward starting next month. So the next month starts in just a couple days, but starting next week in December, all of my classes will be 1.5 hours long. So instead of having 4 1-hour classes each month, excuse me, getting over a little cold here. So there might be a lot of that in this hour. So y'all just bear with me. I got my tea close at hand here. But yeah, so starting next week, they're going to be 1.5 hour long classes 3 times a month. So those dates, will be listed where you sign up for the classes. You can see the dates and, it'll vary from month to month. It's not going to be, each Wednesday. Now it'll be 3 Wednesdays. So if there's 5 Wednesdays in the month, just, check the online listing for which Wednesdays it will be. So yeah, starting in December, I want to really start doing like a callback to some of the earlier skill sets that I covered in this series. I've been doing these classes since July 2021, and I wanted to really go in depth on some of those first skills that we ever covered. So the very first class that we ever had was on Intro to Graphite and drawing forms, I believe. That's like probably the #1 class that I have one of my favorite moderator here, Chanel, bring up all the time. So she can probably correct me on the title of that class. But we're going to have a new version of that. And it's going to be graphite drawing, what I call it? Graphite drawing pencils, like Intro to Graphite Drawing Pencils. So we already kind of covered the contour lines a few classes ago. But now we're going to get into it, and it's going to be 1.5 hours long, and we'll talk all about the full range of the graphite pencils. So if you've ever wondered what those numbers and letters on the graphite pencils stand for and what the differences are and the optimal ways to use them, we'll be covering that in that upcoming class. So that one will be next Wednesday, I believe. And we've got, we'll also cover a little bit of like drawing value, so the value scale, and then applying that to a sphere there. So that's really fun, and I'm excited about that and excited about the new format to be able to delve into things with a little more time. And then we're going to have a class where we talk about implied line, and we're going to be drawing a set of images using a variation in amount of time, and we'll be doing that over the course of 1.5 hours. So to get into the idea of drawing using implied lines, and then another class that is coming up, let me just get to a little preview drawing here, is line weight using blind contour drawing. So you can read the very in-depth descriptions of those classes. I tried to give like a very full description on all of those class listings that are coming up in December. And those are all using drawing supplies purchased from Michael's. So make sure you check those listings and sign up for those soon. And yeah, I'm looking forward to that new format. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and switch to my tabletop view and go over supplies for this class. Don't forget to tag your work with those hashtags, Make It With Michael's or Michael's Classes, and you can follow me on Instagram at Adrienne Hodge Art. I'm also on Facebook, Adrienne Hodge Fine Art, if you can see that there on my business card. And then here's some of my work using calligraphy ink. So yeah, all right. So we're using golden acrylic paint to do this color theory basics page on canvas paper. And so I've got some canvas paper, I believe it's the Frederick's brand, yes. And then I've got this little set of golden paints of heavy body acrylics, and they come with a red, blue, and yellow, our primary colors. They also come with a green and then black and white. I've got a couple of paintbrushes here, really any paintbrush that, you know, will get you like a nice little swatch, because that's pretty much what we're doing here is just painting little swatches. So a flat brush or a little round brush will do you just fine. And then you're going to want some palettes. I probably could have cleaned my palettes a little better than this. I had a couple of private lessons yesterday and did not follow up when my students cleaned my palettes for me. Okay, and then we've got some paper towels, a couple of water cups. You might want 2 of them. That's always nice to have, so you can kind of keep your light and darks separate. And although we're probably going to muddy these waters tonight with all of our color mixing we're going to be doing. And then you're going to want a Sharpie just so that you can label on the canvas paper, but you could do this in your sketchbook as well. Acrylic paint can, you know, a sketchbook, mixed media paper could handle this, and then you could use a pencil or a pen, so whatever you have on hand. But canvas paper will definitely hold this acrylic paint a little better, and you can use any other paints that you have if you do not have acrylic paints, if you're just joining us and jumping in right here. Okay, so let's review what we covered last week. We got about this far in our little sheet that we're making here. And this is a great reference sheet, you know, for like a page of notes to have to refer back to. So, you know, you could tape this to the wall in your studio space or wherever you work on your art, have it handy. And, you know, it'll be really nice to refer back to in, you know, in place of like a color wheel, maybe. Excuse me, I'm bumping my camera. Okay, so we talked about the primary colors last week, and then we talked about our secondary colors. So our secondary colors are the colors that we get when we mix 2 primary colors together. And the way that we organized this, so we kind of made like a limited color wheel here. We didn't put our intermediate or tertiary colors in here. Those would be our you know, in between the primary and the secondary. So we have the primaries, yellow, blue, and red. And then opposite them, I put the secondary color that is the complement here. So I've got yellow and violet, blue and orange, red and green. And then when we mix, you know, just to review the secondary colors, when we mix yellow and blue together, we get green. When we mix yellow and red together, we get orange. And when we mix blue and red together, we get violet. These primaries that come in this set are, you know, a little on the warmer side. So all of our secondary colors are going to be warmer. And we talked about that last week as far as like cool and warm primaries, you know, how like a magenta pink would be a little bit cooler primary than this more kind of fire engine red, the Napthol red light gives you. So when we mix, and then, you know, I also talked about like a lighter blue might give you a different kind of, you know, secondary color. So my point is when we mix these 2 red and blues together, we get a darker violet. So same thing with our green and our orange. They're just a little bit on the darker side here. And you might be mixing your primaries together and getting, you know, a different kind of secondary. And so that kind of brings us to talk about those tertiary colors, which are like the red, orange, yellow, orange, red, violet, blue, violet, yellow, green, blue, green, etc. So we didn't make those here, but we talked about them last week, but we really focused on these complementary colors in part one. So if I feel like I'm going really fast here, you can just refer back to the part one of the class to fill in any blanks here. Complementary colors are colors that are opposite each other on a color wheel, which you can find easily referenced anywhere online if you search color wheel in Google image search. And so when we mix these complementary colors together that are opposite on the color wheel and highly contrasting to each other, we get neutral colors, or we get like some type of brown. So whenever we mixed our yellow and our violet together, we got these neutral browns, or we got this neutral brown. When we mixed our orange and blue together, we got this brown or neutral color. And then when we got mixed our red and our green together, we got this neutral brown. So they neutralize each other when you mix them together. And then when we added even more of the complement, so we added a little more violet and a little more yellow, we got this kind of darker version of this brown, etc., etc. So we added more complements here. And then when we added a little bit of white to these various complements, we got these right here. So that took a full hour last time, because mixing up all those colors takes some time. And it doesn't happen right away. So sometimes it requires a little bit of trial and error and to get to those neutral browns. And those are very helpful. They're very helpful for painting things in nature, obviously, and then also skin tones. So, and I've covered this before in a class on skin tones using watercolor, and we have that class to drop into the chat so that you can reference that if you'd like later. Excuse me, I'm gonna have to pause quite a bit to drink my tea, y'all, or else I might get a little choked on my voice. Okay, so yeah, we spent a lot of time mixing together those complements, and I was just saying, where those could be helpful. But the other thing I wanted to mention is what benefits there are from working from a limited palette like this. Like you might be saying, well, I have like a Van Dyke brown or a, sienna or something that, or, a burnt umber that's pretty close to that color. Like, what is the purpose behind mixing these colors with your primaries? Why do all this hard work when you can buy, a tube of paint that comes in these neutral browns? And two reasons. One, it saves you money. You can get a little higher quality paint and just buy your primaries in black and white, and then you can mix up all the colors that you could possibly want just from those 5 colors. And then the other reason is it really brings a sense of unity into a painting when all of the colors that you're mixing to create this full range of colors are all coming from the same 3 primary paints. You're just going to have a greater sense of like connection between the colors in your composition. So there's a lot of benefits to mixing from a primary palette, and it also really helps folks with just understanding color, which is such a huge part of the painting process, and something that can remain a mystery when you don't mix your own colors. Okay, so that's my little soapbox there about why I think mixing from primaries is so helpful. But now I want to mix up a black to get us started here. So we're gonna mix up a black, and we're gonna add some water to it, and so that we can see like how when we basically are gonna mix up some browns like we did before with our complementary colors here. So it's going to take us a little bit of time to get to that point because we're going to have to, start over from where we were last week, because I bet your acrylic paint dried up just like mine did. And then, so when we mix our yellow and violet together, we're going to get, that brown again, and then we're going to add more blue to it so that we're basically mixing blue and brown. So you can just, if you already have brown in a set of paint, you can just mix brown and blue together to get black. So we're basically just going to take all these different browns that we are going to make or have made before with our complementary colors, and we're going to add ultramarine blue. And then when we add ultramarine blue, we're going to get something that really appears black. I mean, before I added water to these, look how black those all appear, right? But then when we add water to them, we're going to see that they have a little bit of a hue to them. So they're going to be a more dynamic black. And that's going to differ from the black that just comes straight out of the tube. Okay, so let's get into it because it's going to take us some time here. So first, let's mix, let's start with yellow and violet. We're going to have to make that violet first real quick. And essentially all we're doing here is just mixing our primaries together each time. And I will be very aware of the time so that we maybe might need to zip it along here. At a certain point, we might like skip over a couple of these and come back to them, but we're going to at least do one. So let's start with our 3 primaries again. And you always want to start with your lightest color first, and then slowly add the darker colors so that the darker color doesn't just eat the lighter color. So I'm going to start with some yellow over here to the side, and then I'm going to clean my brush before I go to my next color. Oh, I forgot, I gotta make the violet first. Okay, so let's take some red off to the side. We're gonna quickly turn this water brown. That's why it's good to have 2 cups. Okay. So I'll always kind of take the new color I'm adding off to the side a little bit first, because it's easier to kind of slowly introduce it than to just put it in there right away. All right, so that maybe is not going to look super violet on our palette, and we talked about that last week, how like painting a swatch of something makes such a huge difference because it's always going to look different on the palette versus on the canvas or the paper. So we're just going to trust that we made a violet here, although I might add a little more blue. There we go. That's looking like a nice violet to me. But yeah, it definitely skews a little more on the red violet side, just based on these reds and blues that we're using here. Depending on how much blue and red you use, it might be looking a little more blue violet, or it might be looking a little more red violet. Okay. So,
hey, Adrienne. What colors did you use for violet?
Red and blue.
And how would I make my violet brighter?
So that would be something that we covered in the part 1. So I'm going to just go ahead and defer back to that so I don't get too sidetracked repeating too many things. But we definitely talked about how different primaries will make different sorts of secondary colors in the part 1 of the class. So I'm going to just leave it at that because it's a really long answer. Okay, so I'm mixing my violet with my yellow here, and I kind of slowly started with my yellow and then introduced the violet, you know, slowly, because if I just added the yellow to this pile of violet, it would just eat it up. The darker color is always going to eat the lighter color. And see, I got a neutral brown when I mix those together. Okay, so now we want to turn that black. So like I said, we maybe are going to, let's like just do one of these, and then we'll get to our other parts of this page that we're making tonight. And then I'm going to come back to this if we have more time to mix up all of these three blacks using the various complementary colors, just because I'm worried about running out of time here in the hour. Okay, so I've got this brown, so we can get that neutral brown by mixing our complementary colors, right? And so, yeah, if this is all brand new to you, then you want to check out part 1. But for now, we're just going to go with brown, and then we're mixing blue. So your darkest brown that you can get. So I maybe wanted to like add more of the complements to like get it to be a little bit. Let me switch back to this page that I want to actually paint a swatch on. So when we add, you know, a little bit more violet and yellow to it to kind of just like keep neutralizing it, it's going to get a little darker each time. So that was my darker brown. So let me actually do that now, since I've kind of got the lighter brown here. And like I said, it's just some combination of the primaries. I mean, because you can just keep mixing all of your primaries together until you get to black or something that feels very dark black. So basically I'm just kind of going with this formula first, but all I'm doing here is mixing the primaries together until I get to something that feels black. Okay, so I'm going to add some more ultramarine blue to this brown. And it maybe is not going to feel black immediately. You might want to, you know, add, it might look like really violet, but when you paint a swatch of it, like a full swatch of it without adding any water to it. So I'm going to really load up my brush with this and like really mix it up in there. And if you're using a palette knife, sometimes it can take like a lot of really folding the paint over itself to like get it to fully mix together. So sometimes people get impatient with just the mixing process and don't mix it very thoroughly. So you're seeing like the more I mix it together, the more it starts to really feel black here. And then especially when I paint a swatch of it, that's gonna look pretty dark. Okay, so that's my swatch with adding ultramarine blue to my brown that I got by mixing yellow and violet. So I'm just going to go down here and write plus ultramarine blue. Oh, I was worried that the Sharpie I grabbed was not the best Sharpie. Let me see if I've got another. Oh my goodness, look at this. I got an Artist Loft permanent pen right here waiting for me to grab instead. That's handy. All right, so we added our ultramarine blue. Oh dear, my cat is being very squirrely right now, y'all. Hang on 1 second. All right, so we're gonna add a little water to this to pull it down. So I'm taking my clean cup of water here, and I'm just gonna add some water, just drip some water in here, and I'm just, let me actually switch to my other paintbrush. I can just drop some clean water on it. And then we're just gonna drag this color down the page a little bit and just watch, you know, this variation in the color when we add water to it. And you can do the same thing with the black that comes right out of the tube. You know, just add some water to it and drag it down the page and just notice the difference. Like they both are going to look pretty dark black you know, when you paint the like full body of it, but whenever you add water, you're going to see that kind of dimensionality, that like violet dimensionality coming into it. And, you know, just that it's got more of a color there and not just that flat black. Okay, so we're just noticing the difference between making our own black and what happens when we add water to it. So if we have time, we'll come back and we'll do that again with all of our complements. So this was my example of adding water to the one that I mixed with orange and blue. And then this was the one with red and green. So the red and green oftentimes will have like a lot of like a purple hue to it. The one with the violet has a lot of a purple hue to it. This one, the blue, really kind of shines out of it when you add water to it. So just noticing that difference. And, you know, I can tell you right off the bat something that I use this in my personal work with inks, like just go into one of my business cards that happens to be right here. I'll use, you know, blue and brown to make this kind of black for a night sky. And it will, you know, will feel very black, but it's got this like richness to it because you see the browns and the blues kind of shining through on it. So it just gives it a little bit more of an interesting, you know, dynamic to have that black that you mixed versus the black straight out of the tube. Okay, but speaking of the black straight out of the tube, let's pull that one out now, and we're going to make a value scale. So I'm always talking about in the drawing classes this value scale from black to white, and I like to say 0 to 10. On this value scale, 10 being the absolute white, or if we're drawing with pens, it might be the blank paper that we leave for white. And then black is or 10 is the absolute black with no light shining through. So, and then our medium gray is going to be kind of right there in the middle. So we're going to mix together our black and our white, and we're going to make a value scale here using just black and white, and then we'll make another value scale using a color. Okay, so I'm going to start with my white because I always start with my lighter color first, and then slowly add the darker color to it. So you can do this with the black that you made as well if you'd like to just see the difference between a grayscale mixed with black out of the tube versus you know, the black that you made using brown and blue. I'm going to take some white kind of separate here so that I can still have some white that hasn't turned gray in just a moment for my other value scale. And I'm just going to slowly introduce the black, and I'm going to get some kind of gray immediately. So there's no wrong way to do this. Like if you accidentally get if you don't get the gray that you're aiming for right away, you're going to want that gray that you made eventually. Like I joked with the first class, there's no such thing as a wrong color. There's just the color you don't need right now. Okay, so I got a pretty light gray right off the bat. And we do want to go ahead and paint a swatch of white and black on either end of this value scale that we're making as well. I'm going to do this over here to the side. And this one's definitely on my lighter side, so I'm going to do it just kind of right here. And it's okay if they're not in order. I always encourage people to make kind of messy value scales, and I might just go ahead and do that now since, you know, I'm worried about the time and I don't want to worry about this being perfect, and it will encourage you to not worry if yours is perfect. So basically all of our lighter grays are kind of our tints of gray, and all of our darker grays are our shades of gray, and we'll get back to that. I mean, I know they're all technically shades of gray, right? But we'll get back to that when we talk about the value scale of a color here in just a moment. Okay, so I'm just getting progressively darker with all of these, and then I'll just go back and add my white and black at the end because I kind of forgot about it. But if, as I'm talking, you want to go ahead and put your white and black at either end of this scale, you can, but we're just mixing up a variety of grays here. So you're looking for, you don't have to have 10. It's nice to have 10. That way you can kind of see that full, or I guess 11, so that you have 0 to 10 on that value scale. But when I'm teaching an in-person class, you know, I'm usually like trying to zip us along through that as well. I always say to like keep colors separate, and then I'm like, do as I say, not as I do. Like I'm totally mixing my colors together on this palette. I went a little darker than I meant to already. But yeah, my point was when I'm teaching an in-person class, I will say, you know, even just like 3 light grays, 3 dark grays, and then, you know, your medium gray and your white and black. So I guess that adds up to 9 instead of 11. And yeah, if they're out of order, or if you accidentally make 2 that look like pretty darn close, that's okay. We're just looking for a variety of grays here, and we're just looking for an understanding of that value scale from white to black and everything in between, or something representing the in between. I don't know about y'all, but oh my goodness, my cat is driving me nuts. He's now scratching up the couch. Oh dear. I tried texting my partner a minute ago to come get her, but I guess he didn't get the message. All right. Okay, so just getting progressively darker. And yeah, when I get to this like dark gray, it's looking pretty close to black, right? So I'm going to go ahead and clean my brush so that I don't have any white in my brush, and we can get a full flat black here. And then I'll clean my brush again. And get just my white. Though I feel like I could do a little more of like a baby's breath gray here with just like a tiny bit of black in there. And I always encourage everybody to go like a super light with their gray, just because having that, you know, full scale there, not just leaving like one light gray, but having, you know, at least 3 like pretty light grays there will just really help you to see that full contrast between the light and the dark. And then I want one swatch of just white paint. And if you happen to have, you know, like some toned canvas paper, that white, you know, will really show up against that. But we can still, you know, see the white paint against this white canvas paper. It's good to have that on there so you can just see the full value scale. And then I'm not going to write it just because I feel like we're running out of time so quickly. But I kind of wrote value scales down the side there. Okay, and I see somebody was asking about watching how I was mixing. I was really mixing all of them in the same two little holes in my palette here. So if you wanted to preserve each gray that you were making, you could mix them separately, but I was kind of just adding or taking away, just kind of doing like an additive and subtractive thing to the same little mixture there, since we're just looking for a value scale right now, and we don't need each particular gray. But if you were, going to paint a little still life in black and white, then you would certainly want to, keep some amount of each gray that you're mixing so that you could have it there. Okay, so I'm going to use
Adrienne, I have a quick question for you.
Yes.
My watercolor mixes very blue. Is it possible to get to black with watercolors, or is that dependent on the quality of the paint?
I mean, yes, it kind of depends on your primaries that you're using. If your primaries are on the lighter side, then they are always going to get you something that feels more blue or purple when you mix them all together. No matter how much you mix them, they're just never going to get to like something that feels super dark black. But that's fine. I mean, you can look back at like the impressionist paintings, not all impressionists, but Monet in particular only used violet instead of black in his palette. But when you look at a Monet painting, you can see where the violet is being used as black, it still reads as the darkest value in the painting, and it still reads as black. So when you get it in contrast to like all the rest of the colors there, it and when you paint a swatch of it, it will definitely look darker than your blue, or it'll look darker than your violet. So yeah, if whatever you can get by mixing all of your primaries together is the closest you can get to black, then that's what you do, if that's all you have, and that can work just fine. Okay, so I'm going to use this green since it comes in this set and we don't really have a use for it, focusing on our mixing everything from our primaries here. So I just pulled out a different palette here so I can save time, and that one was getting pretty full. And I'm just starting with my green and my black and my white, and we're going to make a full value scale of this green. You can use whatever color you want. You can do it with blue, you can do it with red. If you do it with yellow, you might want to use your brown instead of your black. But also it's kind of cool when you mix black with yellow. You're just going to get kind of like an interesting sort of color. But I think if you really want like a more pure yellow scale, using brown at the end instead of black is cool. You'll get kind of like a greenish color when you mix the black with the yellow. You'll see what I mean if you do it. It's not green, but it's like, let's not worry about that right now. Let's just use blue or red or green, or you could use your orange, or your violet, whatever you have on your palette that you want to mix with black and white to get a value scale. So our main color in the middle, the green out of the tube, that's going to be our hue. That's our HUE, our pure color. And then when we add black to it, we're going to get our tints of that color. Oh, I'm so sorry. Scratch that. We're going to get our shades of that color. So shades. And then we're going to get our tints when we add white. Okay, so we're starting with our green. I'll put this off to the side again. And we'll let's go ahead so I don't get ahead of myself this time. We're going to do our green right in the middle. I'm going to put it right about here. And you can label that with your marker or your pencil or whatever you're working with. Hue right there. And then I'm going to clean my brush and do black on the end. Oops, I got a little water in there. And then white on the other end. So we're making a green scale here, a green value scale. So this is a great exercise to do with every color on your palette, just so that you can see the kind of full range of value that you can get with just that one color. So if we were, painting like a green piece of fabric, like a green shirt, the light might be hitting that green shirt and giving you all of these tints of green. And then where the light's hitting it directly, you might have pure white. And then where there's a shadow falling on that green fabric or green shirt, it might look like a shade of green. And then in the darkest shadow of that fabric, it might look black. So having this full range of green is going to help you to paint, the light that's falling across that fabric more easily. All right, I might kind of break down my little cleaning my brush after each one here and just start going for it, because I feel like we're going to run out of time. And we still got to get to these pastels down here and adding some grays to some of our colors. Okay, we'll get as far as we can here, but if not, I'm going to give you all the tools to be able to finish this sheet on your own. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and do this one right in the middle here. And this kind of is a pastel of this green. So we're just adding, white to a color will give you something that feels like a tint, but it might also, be what you would call a pastel as well. So a tint can definitely feel like a pastel version of that color. So I'm just getting like that baby's breath version of the green with a lot of white and just a little bit of green. And then we'll add a little bit more green here. And then on our shade side, we're not going to have any white. So sometimes I've had people in an in-person class get confused when we're doing this. If we do the grayscale first, they might start adding like grays to their colors, and that's gonna that's gonna give you a whole different thing. So if we have any white on our shade side, it's not going to feel the same as just the color and black. And same on the tint side. So I'm going to clean my brush really well, and I'm not going to use any white for the shade side here. And I'm going to start with my green over here in a separate area and slowly add the black, because the black is going to overtake it. And yeah, let's just see what happens when we add a little bit of black. It definitely makes it a little darker. And I'm just slowly adding a little bit more black each time to the same mixture. So that's gonna give me a progressively darker green each time. And then my, dark green might look almost black, but it's gonna have some green in it. It's not gonna be the same as the absolute black. So in the darkest shadow of that green fabric, it may look solid black. There may not be any green shining there. But this dark green here definitely has some green in it, but it looks almost black, right? So we're just noticing what happens when we add, just a little bit of something to another color. And this is, like I said, so beneficial to do with any any color that you make so that you can see the full value scale of that color. Okay, so now let's move down here and look at some pastels. So we're going to need to mix up a little bit of, some of these colors again. Well, here we just are going to do our red, blue, and yellow. We're just going to start with, sorry, I've got like my crumpled paper here because I'm trying not to lay it flat on the wet paint on the table. We're just going to start with our white and slowly add a little bit of each of our primaries to it so that we can get the pastel version. I mean, like I said, it really is just like a tint, like that baby's breath tint of that color. But sometimes people really need help making these light versions of these colors because they're just adding a little too much each time. So, noticing how you can control the mixtures to be able to get just like a touch of these things to get a pastel can be really helpful. All right, so we're going to take a little pile of white off to the side here, and then we're just using I use that term baby's breath quite a lot with this because it's just like that was maybe even a little too much red. I'm gonna go ahead and turn this all pink for a second here. So we're looking for a really pale, pale pink. So a lot of white and just a tiny baby's breath of red to get our pastel pink. And then we'll do that same thing with our blue and our yellow. And then we will use these colors again, so kind of keep them a little separate if you can. Because we're gonna add a little bit of gray to all of them and see how we can affect these pastels when we add a little bit of gray to them and make like a pastel gray version of all of them. Okay, so there's our pastel yellow. That's looking like Easter down here so far. And then I'm going to do something that I've never done in one of these classes before, but it's a certain thing that I like to do in my, oh, hang on, give me just one moment and I'll find it here. This is what I like to do in my in-person classes quite a bit. I like to read sometimes like little intentions, like little positive affirmations to my students while they're working, because I recognize that painting can be very stressful for a lot of people. And I get that. It's something that I find to be very meditative, but I think, it's like when you're learning how to drive a car. Driving a car can be very meditative for you, but okay, somebody's saying they can't see my colors at the bottom. They're right here. They're just very pale. We're making pastels. I only label them with my pastels. So they're going to show up really light on the page. I'm just mixing a lot of white and a little bit of the color. So I've got a pink, I've got a yellow, and now I'm making my pastel blue. So I've got a lot of white. And then I'm going to add just a touch of blue to that. Okay, but I was just saying I like to read these little you know, kind of intentions or meditations to students to try to help them like center themselves in the process and to remember that, you know, this is supposed to be fun, and color mixing can be extremely meditative and fun if you embrace like, you know, the process of it, if you don't get impatient for, you know, the product. Okay, so here's my little intention. I'm going to read it to you guys on the Zoom here. All right. So got a lot of moving parts here because I'm trying to read while also mixing. All right, so here we go. Curiosity is an interest or concern, an oddity or strangeness, a rarity or a collector's item, a novelty item. So what fascinates you about the process of painting? Is it the materials, the texture of paint brushing against a canvas, or the marvel of color itself? As you explore and investigate value scales and color tonight, what interests or concerns do you have around color theory and color mixing? How can you stay curious when the act of color mixing becomes difficult or frustrating? I'm going to pause right there so that I can start mixing up my orange pastel. So I'm just going to take some of my red and some of my yellow, and I'm kind of breaking down, like keeping my palette clean and separate now. We're going to make an orange, and then we're going to add just a touch of this orange to some white so that we can get a pastel orange here. And then I keep reading my little meditation as we do that. Okay, so think of each color you mix as a collector's item. We're arranging in a closet for future inquisitiveness. You have an abundance of curiosity, the simple act of transforming a color or value with additive and subtractive measures. The subtle or severe ways one color responds to another color. Your palette will be a marvelous painting in and of itself. Understanding color is enough. Understanding how to mix one color is enough. There is meaning in every color swatch you create and collect in your investigation. That's it. That's my little meditation for color mixing for you. So to just, you know, try to center ourselves in this process and how, you know, it can be very frustrating, or it can be a very, you know, take this slow, methodic approach to it that like, I'm mixing an orange and that's all I'm doing. I'm mixing some white with it to make a pastel orange. And like every color that you make can be enough, you know, if you don't get the color that you're looking for right then and there, just know that this takes years to master, and it can take years of struggle to understand it. But if you take away from this exercise tonight the understanding of how to mix one color now, that you're like, yeah, I get it. I know how to make violet, you know, or I know how to make orange. Like, even if that's your only takeaway and you have to rewatch part 1 and part 2 of this video to get all the rest of it, like that can be enough, right? This is definitely not something that I learned and mastered in 2 hours. So, you know, take it with a grain of salt, and, you know, try to be patient with this process, and know that it is something that takes a lot of time to, you know, to fully comprehend. But, you know, the more you can kind of approach it with like curiosity and like, yeah, that inquisitiveness of like, oh, that's interesting. Okay, so now I'm trying to mix up a purple again really quick so that I can make a pastel. And I am very aware that we are approaching the end of the hour here, but even if we can just get 1 or 2 of these pastel grays to happen, I think I'll be satisfied. And yeah, my palette's getting really messy now. I don't know about y'all. Okay, so I'm mixing that purple with my white. I might need a little more white here because I've turned it all. Kind of dark purple really quickly. Well, no, that's pretty good. The more I mix it, the more of a pastel violet I'm starting to see there. So sometimes just thoroughly mixing it is all you got to do. You might be like, oh, it's not looking right. And by the way, in college, in art school, this was one of the hardest things for me. I'll just say, like, if you're on the struggle bus right now, you are not alone. I used to scrape, I used to get just like a, what do you call it? Those, those like knives that come, like the blades that come with like a rubber thing at the end to like clean my big glass palette. I used to get that and just scrape so much paint into the trash because I was like, this color is wrong. This is not the color I wanted, you know? And so it's wrong and it's bad and everything is terrible, you know? So I totally get it. And it was so frustrating. But now I look back on that and I'm like, oh, well, all I really needed to do was, you know, keep going with that mixture or stop adding white to it. Because sometimes we think white is the answer to lightening things up. But really what we need to do is use a different primary. So that's something we talked about in last week's class as well. Okay, so to try to get this pastel green to happen, I think I'm just going to take my pastel yellow and add a touch of blue to it. And looky there, I'm getting a pastel green. Okay, so we maybe are not going to have time to add gray to all of these, but let's at least add gray to a couple of them. So this is the green that I made, by the way. This is not so I'm not getting the same sort of green as that green out of the tube. Okay, so there's my pastels. So now let's just take one of these. I'm just going to take the one that I just made that green. I'm going to go over here to this gray that I have. And I'm going to mix it with some gray and see what happens when I take a pastel and I add a little bit of gray to it. Then I get a gray that has a hue in it. So I've got a greenish gray now. And then I can do that with all of my pastels. I can take my pastel orange and add a little bit of gray to it. So this is where I was saying, you know, we don't want to add gray up here to get this pure value scale of a color to happen. But then, you know, it's good to see, or it's interesting to see what happens when you do take gray and add it to a color. You know, so maybe do that with any and all of your colors if you'd like. So like, here's my orange. I'm going to take some orange and I'm just going to go ahead and mix that orange into this gray. And so now I've got a gray with an orange hue to it. That's interesting. It's another one to put in the curiosity cabinet. Okay, we have 1 minute left, so I wish we had time to sit here and mix all of these together, but let me switch back to my other page, like a cooking show. All right, so this was my gray with violet. This was my gray with blue. This was my gray with, oh, now I'm like questioning it. Maybe that was my gray with blue. That's the green. That's the violet. I'm not quite sure. Maybe this was yellow. That would make sense since it's underneath the yellow. Okay, so that was it, folks. That's color theory basics, the very basics. And yeah, anything that is still mystifying you, you can check out part 1. You can check out that class on skin tones, using the Artist Loft brand watercolors from a while back. And yeah, we'll have more of this. I plan to have more painting classes in the new year. I'm planning to do some like kind of just more painting stuff, because I realized that I tend to skew a little more on the drawing side or with the water media. So I plan to really get into it more. Um, let's see, we are right at the hour. We're a minute after. I usually love to have y'all hold up your pages and show me what you did, but feel free to share those with me on Instagram, and hopefully I'll see you for the next class that will be a little longer. We'll have more time with the graphite intro to graphite pencils coming up next Wednesday. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful evening.